In the spring of 1845, the British government faced a decision that would affect millions of lives. Ireland's potato crop, which fed nearly half the island's 8 million people, showed signs of disease. Officials in London received reports of blight spreading through the fields. The question before them was simple. How should they respond? Ireland at this time was part of the United Kingdom, governed directly from Westminster. The majority of Irish families relied almost entirely on potatoes for their daily food. A single acre could feed a family for a year. This dependence had developed over generations, shaped by land ownership patterns and economic pressures that left little room for diversification. When the blight appeared, it destroyed roughly 40% of that year's crop.
This is the reality of late blight.
The disease, caused by a fungus later identified as Phytophthora infestans, turned healthy potatoes into rotting pulp within days. By autumn, hunger began to spread through the countryside. Local officials wrote to London requesting aid. The government's initial response reflected the economic thinking of the time. Prime Minister Robert Peel ordered the quiet purchase of Indian corn from America, hoping to stabilize food prices without disrupting normal trade. He also established relief commissions to organize public works projects, offering wages in exchange for labor on roads and infrastructure. These measures helped during the first year. The corn arrived and was sold at cost. The public works employed thousands. Deaths from starvation remained relatively low. Many officials believed the crisis would pass after one difficult season. But the blight returned in 1846, and this time it was worse. Nearly the entire potato crop failed across Ireland. The scale of the disaster became clear by late summer. Families who had survived the previous year on partial harvests now faced total loss. At this critical moment, British policy shifted. Peel's government fell, and a new administration took power under Lord John Russell. The new leadership held firm beliefs about government intervention in markets.
Yet it was swiftly loaded.
They viewed
for
direct
export.
food aid as interference with natural economic laws. Relief, they argued, should come through employment, not charity. The public works program expanded, but it operated under strict conditions. Workers, many already weakened by hunger, had to perform hard labor in exchange for wages that were deliberately kept low to avoid creating dependence. The projects often served no practical purpose, building roads that led nowhere. Meanwhile, food continued to be exported from Ireland to England, protected by the same market principles the government cited when refusing direct aid. Records indicate that during the worst years of the famine, Ireland exported significant quantities of grain,
The Great Famine
livestock,
had by
and other foodstuffs.
1847 utterly
Ships carrying
devastated the
oats,
Irish countryside.
wheat, and cattle left Irish ports while people starved inside of the docks. This wasn't a secret conspiracy. It was the logical outcome of treating a humanitarian crisis as an economic problem to be managed through existing market structures. Administrative delays compounded the crisis.
My child is burning.
Relief
with fever.
measures required
We
approval
won't
from
survive
multiple
this.
levels of bureaucracy. Local officials had to prove absolute destitution before receiving aid. Workhouses, meant to provide shelter and food for the destitute,
Beautiful, isn't it?
were overwhelmed and often
all this
became
time.
sites of disease and death.
Yes,
The
I can
requirement
hardly
that people
believe
give
it.
up their land to enter a workhouse meant choosing between immediate survival and any hope of future recovery. By 1847, the famine had evolved into a broader
An
social
impressive
collapse.
warship indeed.
Disease followed hunger.
By the 1840s,
Typhus and dysentery
these ships of
spread
the
through
line
crowded
were the most
workhouses
expensive objects
and among
built.
families huddled in deteriorating cottages. The death toll climbed month by month. Historians suggest that during this period, roughly 1 million people died from starvation and disease. Another million emigrated, fleeing to America, Canada, and Britain in desperate conditions. The ships that carried them became known as coffin ships. Passengers were crammed into holds with minimal food and water. Many died during the crossing. Those who survived often arrived sick and destitute. The government's expenditure on Irish relief, while substantial in absolute terms, remained limited compared to the scale of the catastrophe. More money was spent on other projects during the same period, The Royal Navy, for instance, received greater funding than Irish relief efforts. This wasn't necessarily cruelty. It reflected priorities shaped by political philosophy and contemporary economic theory. Officials genuinely believed that minimal intervention would produce better long-term outcomes. They feared that direct food aid would create permanent dependency and undermine Ireland's economic development. They trusted that market forces, if left to operate freely, would eventually restore balance. These assumptions proved catastrophically wrong,
As the famine took
but they were
hold,
consistent
the
with
Western
respected
unions
economic
were the
thought of
first
the
to
era.
collapse under
The
strain.
consequences extended far beyond the
We
immediate death
focused on
toll.
soil health.
Ireland's
and the results
population,
speak for themselves.
which stood at over
Decades
8
of
million
relying on a
before the
single
famine,
crop have made us
fell to
vulnerable
roughly
this
6
blight.
million by 1851. It would never recover those numbers. Entire communities disappeared. The Irish language,
While
spoken
England
widely
enjoyed
before the famine,
unprecedented plenty,
declined
just
sharply
across
as
the
native
Irish
speakers
Sea,
died or
the blight
emigrated.
brought only
The social and
starvation
political
despair.
effects lasted generations. The famine deepened resentment toward British rule and strengthened movements for Irish independence. It established patterns of emigration that continued for over a century. Irish communities formed in cities across America and Britain,
The
shaped by the
demographic
trauma
impact
of those who had
famine
fled
was severe.
starvation.
The population
In later
plummeted,
decades,
and,
as the full
chart
scope of
clearly
the disaster
demonstrates,
became clear, questions arose about whether more could have been done. Government archives revealed the debates that had taken place in London during the crisis. Officials had been aware of the severity of the situation. They had chosen policies based on principles that, in retrospect, proved inadequate to the scale of human suffering. The mistake was not a single decision, but a sustained commitment to an approach that prioritized economic doctrine over immediate human need. It demonstrated how reasonable-sounding policies, applied rigidly during a crisis, could transform a natural disaster into a humanitarian catastrophe. The potato blight caused the initial crop failures. The famine that followed was shaped by the response to that crisis. What appeared at the time to be prudent economic management, designed to avoid long-term dependency and preserve market stability, instead produced one of the deadliest famines in European history. The cost, measured in lives lost and communities destroyed, far exceeded any theoretical benefit the policies were meant to achieve. The consequences of those choices would echo through Irish society for more than a century, long after the officials who made them had passed from the scene.